you.
I'd like to call to order our September 28, 2020 Board of Education meeting for the Cedar Rapids Community School District. As a reminder, our meeting is currently being live streamed on the district YouTube channel. And I'd also like to provide a brief overview of why we continue to utilize Zoom as our virtual platform for board meetings. In order to follow the CDC and the Cedar Rapids Community School District health guidelines, the boardroom can only accommodate a maximum of 10 to 15 people. In addition, all CR, CSD buildings remain closed to the public. Zoom provides what is required by law and gives our public audience, convenient way to experience our board meetings with the ability to see all faces and hear all voices. The complexities of abiding by the Iowa Open Law is difficult to accomplish when you need the ability to simultaneously accommodate in-person, Zoom, and live streaming to YouTube. Next, we will move to the approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
Gary, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
This requires a roll call.
Director Anhalt,
Aye.
Director Garlock,
Aye.
Director Borcherding,
Aye.
Director Tominski,
Aye.
Director Merschbach,
Aye.
Director Newman. Aye. President Humbles.
Aye. Next, we'll move to the superintendent's report. Now I'll turn it over to Superintendent Bush for her report.
Thank you, President Humbles, and good evening, everyone. Huge applause to our educators, to our families, and to our students. We accomplished a first week of school plus 1 day. It's been a wonderful week, and to think that we have not had children in person in our buildings for 6 months. I hope we never, ever experience that long of a period of time again. But I just have a few highlights from this wonderful first week of school. From kindergarten through 12th grade, just amazing things happening across our district. Our virtual remote learning, which we have scaled, as you know, as an entire district. Our K through 12 kids were back in school last week. And for those who chose that as an option, and even in our secondary schools where it's the only option because of the condition of our buildings, I have witnessed kids doing amazing things for the first time in virtual learning, and our instructors who have transformed how they teach in this new format. So much went into planning a successful week, and we certainly had a few technical bumps, but by the end of the week, things kept ironing out. And I would say that's true even to this week, but for the most part, high engagement, and truly in this environment, our teachers making personal relationships with their kids was just fantastic to see. Secondly, our in-person instruction, which also has a whole new layer to it. The safety measures that are being taken in all of our elementary schools and our 3 middle schools, tremendous. Our teachers have put in strategies and implementations so that everybody's learning and owning those safety measures together. And watching kids being in person, socially distant, and still engaged with one another, that happens with strong instruction, committed educators, and a lot of leadership. So just so proud of the work of the district, and so proud of our kids for tackling all this newness together. Amazing, from 5 years old to 18 years old. tremendous work. Today was the beginning of our early learning environments. Preschool was back today, and even our remote preschool learners have an iPad at home. So I'll look forward to hearing and seeing and witnessing what happens with preschools across our district. And in order to make all of this happen, especially in the remote learning environments, we knew that we needed to provide a lot of support throughout our district. So we know that there's still families with internet access hiccups. So just want to continue to invite those phone calls coming into the schools from our families, reach out to teachers, reach out to our school secretaries so that we can get you connected with what you need. In addition to that, our help desk, which has traditionally really been for staff support, has now expanded to family and student support. We had a tremendous volume of calls last week, to the point I think where folks were getting frustrated of waiting in line. Our tech team spent the weekend going through the list of all of those backlogs and getting in touch with our families to make sure that all questions have been answered. And we hope as we move forward that will also level out. So as we move forward, we look forward to continuing to provide choice and opportunities to our families. They have until October 12th. We'll be engaging and offering families who might be considering their current option to make sure it's a right fit for them. That if they change their path from remote to in-person or in-person to remote, that we'll have to manage that, but we certainly want to continue to provide support. So that deadline is going to be October 12th. And then also, just as a reminder, we're still working on restoration of buildings. Great work is happening there. And we have 3 more middle schools that we hope are making their ways forward. So that's McKinley, Franklin, and Taft. As we move deeper into the fall, we hope before Thanksgiving break that we'll be able to open the doors of our middle schools. And as you know, the 3 comprehensive high schools will keep working on throughout the rest of the semester. But just a celebration. Kids are back in school, and that deserves 2 claps. Whoop, whoop. Yeah. So happy.
Thank you, Superintendent Bush. Do we have any board reports?
President Humbles,
Yes.
this is Gary. Just a brief, I had a IESB State Exec Board meeting last week in Des Moines, and as part of that discussion, we learned a little bit more about the virtual fall conference that traditionally has not been virtual, but because of COVID, we're transitioning this year to it. And I know there will be registration material that'll come out very shortly from Laurel about it, but I would just encourage all board members to sign up. Because of it being virtual, all of the sessions will be recorded. You can watch them live if you so desire, but you also will have, because of being registered, you'll be able to go back and access any of the sessions for a year and be able to play them back. So no travel involved this time, no overnight stay, none of that. Be able to participate at your own leisure, at your own time. So I would just encourage all board members to seriously consider accepting that registration opportunity. And I think it would enable us to maybe have some in-depth conversations about some of the sessions. Some very, very notable keynote speakers. Again, I just can't stress enough. I think this is the year that everybody sign up. Thank you.
And I agree with Gary. It gives you an opportunity. You learn so much at the conferences to take advantage of it. And like Gary said, you don't have to leave your home. They're going to record them. So that will give you an opportunity to hear the great speakers and the information they share. Any other board reports? What we'll move on to communications, delegation, and petitions. And at this time, we have had no requests for anyone to speak before the board. So we will move on to our consent agenda. Are there any items that a board member would like to pull for a comment, question, or separate vote?
President Humbles,
Yes.
I would just like to make a comment on BA-21-090.1 through 4. This is the agreement with Interstate Power and Light regarding the pilot program that we're entering into with Interstate Power and Light. I want to thank district staff for including us in this pilot program. For people in the community, basically what we're going to be doing is cooperating with Interstate Power and Light to test the performance of electric buses in the cold climate. And Interstate Power and Light is providing some resources, some charging infrastructure for those electric buses. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us as a district to look at ways that we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and address some of the climate change situations that are happening locally and nationally, especially in light of derecho. We've got some unusual climate things happening. So my hat's off to whoever made this possible. I think we should investigate more things like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or items? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Gary, second.
Do we have any further discussion at all? Seeing none, this requires a roll call vote.
Director Tominski,
Aye.
Director Newman, Director Newman,
Sorry, aye.
Director Merschbrock,
Aye.
Director Garlock,
Aye.
Director Borcherding,
Aye.
Director Anhalt,
Aye.
President Humbles.
Sorry. Aye. Next, we'll move on to administration. Is a resolution regarding the scheduling of a public hearing for the instructional support levy. At our September the 4th board meeting, Dave provided an overview of the ISL and its importance for the instruction and instructional support resources. Do we have a motion for the resolution?
This is Director Garlock. I make a motion for the resolution.
Does this require a roll call? Oh, I'm sorry. We need a second. I'm sorry. Is there a second?
Second.
Is that Dave?
Yes.
Any further discussion for Dave? Okay, this requires a roll call.
Director Newman,
Aye.
Director Garlock,
Aye.
Director Merschbrock,
Aye.
Director Tominski,
Aye.
Director Borcherding,
Aye.
Director Anhalt,
Aye.
Director Garlock, did I say you already?
Yes, you did, and I say aye.
Very good. And President Humbles.
Aye. Next, we have the annual request to the SBRC for special education negative balance for FY 1920. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 I'm getting feedback here. Did I hear everyone? Did we get the aye? Okay. All those
Aye.
opposed, same sign. Thank you. Next, we have the request. We have the annual request for the SBRC for the modified allowable growth for limited English learner program costs. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Next, Dave will provide the annual financial highlight for FY 2020. And this is an information item only and does not require a vote.
Thank you, President Humbles and the Board of Directors. I am pleased to present our fiscal year highlights for FY 20. So in FY 20, this is a comparison of all of our revenues and expenditures for all funds. And so if we go across the top here for general fund, you can see that we brought in 215 million and in general fund, and which is by far our largest fund of revenue that we brought in for the year. And then our smallest one, of course, is the student activity fund. We brought in 2.9 million. And you can see that our sales tax, we brought in 20.7 million. Debt service, that is actually quite high for the year for debt service. Typically, it's not that high. We actually refunded some bonds last year, a $30 million issue. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And that's kind of why the revenues are kind of high here. And then followed by nutrition fund and the management fund. And then our daycare funds are the other funds here. And so if we look at expenditures, you can see that we spent 219 million, almost 220 million in general fund. And our next highest is debt service, followed by sales tax of 24 million, and then our PEPL and management fund. I'll talk a little bit more about the surplus deficit, but you can see the funds that had a deficit. We had general fund about a $4 million deficit, followed by sales tax, a $3 million deficit, and debt service had a $2 million deficit. I'll kind of explain those deficits later throughout the presentation. But this is just a summary of all of our funds. It's a nice kind of breakdown of how it shook out for the year. And in fiscal year, so this is kind of a breakdown of all of our funds. You can see that in the expenditure side, we have approximately 58% of our all funds expenditure is salaries and benefits. And I want to clarify that it's all funds. Typically, you probably remember hearing about an 80% number with salaries and benefits, and that's really in general fund side. But this is all funds. When you combine them all together, it's 58% is salaries and benefits. You can kind of see where it falls in. We have purchase services 11%, supplies 5%, property 2%, and other items 24%. That's transfers and those types. That's a big area. That's other types of transfers in and whatnot. That's why that's a big chunk for this year. And on revenue side, you can see that local revenue represents about 35%, followed by state of 43%, and federal is 6%, and other financing sources, which includes transferring in and those types of things, at 16%. So for the year, you can kind of see in comparison to FY20 with FY19, you can see that our FY20 revenue was up about 18 million, and our expenditures were up significantly from 225 million. It's a 22% increase in expenditures. Like I said, a big part of that is kind of expenses of refinancing in that mix as well that occurred in that. This is kind of a nice trend that you can see all our funds and how our fund balances have compare each fund. And as you look at this funds, we can go back from FY12 all the way to FY20. And I think it's important to note also, you can see these stars over here, our nutrition fund. One of the things that is a nutrition fund, those and daycare funds, those are called proprietary funds, where they operate like a business. And they have some different accounting. So you're on full accrual, on our books, and which you also accrue all liabilities and long-term liabilities and such. But all other funds throughout the course of the year operate on a modified accrual basis, and during the course of the year for our certified annual report. Our CAFR, on the other hand, brings these funds into a full accrual for reporting purposes, but what we file with the state is unmodified accrual for all of these. But when we compare daycare, we like to take out the GASB 638 requirement of showing the long-term IPERS pension liability. And we like to pull that out because it is a liability that, of course, that we have to record, but in fact, it's not something that we'll probably end up paying. We always record the current liability, which is the current year's worth, but the long-term portion, it really makes the numbers out of skew, and it actually puts the daycare funds in a negative position. And the nutrition funds, fortunately, has enough money that keeps it in a positive position, but it really skews it when you're looking at it. And so we like to back that out when we're actually trying to compare where we have been to where we're at today in fund balances. So most of these funds you're going to see have increased over the years, except for a couple of them. We actually had general fund actually dropped from 32.6 million to 28.6, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Save had a little bit of a drop here, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And also our debt service dropped as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I think it's a nice slide that shows a comparison in very quick form that you can see where all our funds compare. Now we're going to talk about kind of the changes in our deficits, where we're seeing the deficits here. In the general fund, you can see that we had a deficit of just a little over $4 million deficit for the year. And that's meaning when you're looking at revenues and expenses, we have a $4 million, we had $4 million more of expenses than we had revenue coming in. So when we look at a general fund, majority of this deficit can be explained in two areas: special ed deficit and the ELL deficit. Those two represented about $3.2 million of the $4 million was from the deficits that we incurred in both of those programs. And that's something that you just have passed a resolution to give us the modified allowable growth, go to SBRC to get the modified allowable growth to be able to get the authority to back that up. And that's a good part. I mean, that's where the majority of that came from. So we're going to be able to capture that through that additional authority to be granted by the legislature. Sales tax deficit. Why did we end up spending more in sales tax revenue we brought in? Well, if you remember, in FY19, we issued $25.185 million for the construction of bonds for the construction of Coolidge. And so that's an influx of revenue in FY19. Now, going forward in the next couple of years, we're going to be spending all that money. So you're going to continue to see excess expenditures over revenue in the sales tax funds because we borrowed the money, got the proceeds in, and now we're spending it to do the construction. And for FY20, we spent about $2.3 million on Coolidge so far. And obviously this year is going to jump up significantly. It's going to be over $17 million probably. We're estimating that for this year and then our expenditures for Coolidge. And debt service is the reason why that is showing a deficit. We refinanced a $30 million issue, and part of that $30 million issue was we had a bond reserve. We're required to have a $3 million, okay? So because that bond reserve was on our books as a reserve balance, we actually, when we actually refinanced our bonds, we actually had that money in our books already. So we didn't need, so the expenses were a little bit more on our books because we had already $3 million in reserve to help refinance those bonds on the reserve of those $30 million bonds. The $27 million bonds did not have a reserve on that. So that's why you're seeing a negative in here for the debt service. And please stop me if you had any questions. So as I go along here. Now we're looking at the general fund, okay? And the general fund, this is kind of looking at the total expenditures. In total here, we have 80% of our general fund expenses come from salaries and benefits. That's something that's pretty standard. It's been about the 80% for quite some time and continues to be about that. And you can see that employee, our supplies, 4%, purchase services, we're buying services from other agencies and other groups, that's 11%. We have 4% for supplies and 4% for other types of items, kind of transfers in and those types of transfers out, I guess, not in, but out. And again, this is the deficit that was shown on the other screen we talked about. How does it look in dollars and in how our unspent balance and fund balance compares? Okay, I think it's really important to note when we're looking at this, FY20 is here, FY12 is here. You can kind of see where our unspent balance, we actually had kind of reverse look of things back in FY12. We had more unspent balance, more authority, legal authority than we had money in the bank, okay? Or fund balance. We had, but over time, you can see that our fund balance dropped and so did our unspent balance dropped to levels that were very low for a organization that has, you know, $200 million in general fund expenditures. That's very low. And then you can see over time, we have built that up and there was a big focus to increase cash reserve levies. And we increased, the district increased cash reserve levies quite significantly to build these dollars up. And in turn, we actually had a lot of cuts that we did across the district too, because you can't just do this to increase unspent balance. That actually helps our cash position, but we also, to be able to really affect this, you need to cut expenditures to impact that. And that has been done. You can see that over the years, it started going up. And our unspent balance, even though our fund balance dropped, our unspent balance still grew between these 2 years. And a big driving force piece of behind that is also because our fund balance increased, we actually got the authority. We took money from here to pay for special ed and ELL expenses, but we got the authority back in this year. That's why you see this jumping up, because it's helping offset some of this fund balance that we lost here for the special ed deficit and ELL. So we are sitting pretty good in dollars and cents on our fund balance and unspent balance. So we look at that on the next screen here, we see where our goal is. We have a goal of 5 to 10% goal is what we've always been looking at as unspent balance and fund balance. You can see that we have achieved this goal and we've achieved it back in FY15. We started being in the good spot. And so right now we're looking at an unspent balance for FY20 at about 18.3% as unspent balance. And then our fund balance is about 13%. Like I said, it's dropped and went from 15.3 to 13%. But both of them are still we're in good position at this point in time. Solvency ratio. And the solvency ratio is really a measure of the district's financial health. It's a measurement that is standard that people look at across the country. When you look at schools, what's their solvency ratio? And it's based on a formula that takes a look at your undesignated fund balance that's not committed fund balance and the amount of revenue that you have brought in. It's so less the AAA flow through. So when you do that calculation, that's what gives you your solvency ratio. And in FY19 for comparison, our solvency ratio was 13.88. It has dropped to 12.34. One of the things that we want to make sure is we don't want that to drop below 10%. And that's something we're always watching closely. We don't want that to drop below 10%. And so at the high point, we were just over 15. We were at 15.09% in FY18. So it's on a downward trend a little bit, but that's something that we're watching. And we were expecting that because some of the expenses that we have incurred this past year, we actually increased our insurance benefits for a lot of our groups to try to level out contribution rates for our groups. And that's something that we knew when we made that decision that we probably were going to see an impact on our solvency rates for a little bit of time. And so we are seeing that right now, but I think it's something that we're going to continue to monitor, and we want to make sure that we do not let that drop below that 10%. And we'll make adjustments as necessary as we move forward so that does not happen. The next thing, and since we're in a construction mode and looking at our improving our facilities, one of the big things that you want to take a look at is what is our legal debt margin? What is our bonding capacity that we can legally bond for? And so that is it's a statutory number that's established and statutorily, and it's not more than 5% of your total assessed valuation of your district of all property. And so that number for our district is our assessed valuation for our district is a $10.8 billion. 5% of that is 541 million. And you take a look at what we have currently outstanding. These are all the debt that we have currently outstanding. We have a QSAB bonds, 11.8 that we issued. We have some sales tax bonds, and these have been refunded at 13.9. We have revenue bonds that we had at 15.6. Our bonds through Cooley's, 25.185. We refunded the 30 million with this, and we have some lease purchase of some vehicles that we had. So total amount we have outstanding at June 30 is $109 million. You take that off this max amount we have about $432 million of available capacity for our bonding abilities to move in the future. That's something that's good to have right now, because we will be, with our elementary renovations, I know we're going to have some needs. We do have needs at our middle schools and high schools as well. And that we have some legal debt capacity to be able to handle that. Last but not least here, I wanted to kind of talk about something that our line item budget process that we're doing. We're shaking it up a little bit. Instead of have a budget book, what we had board members who have been on the board for a while, remember a budget book, you used to get a whole budget book. And now in the last couple of years, you just received a link to the budget book, line item budget book. And now we're actually kind of shaking up a little bit this year. We're going to try to get this set up in such a way that it is kind of a living document out there where we actually have links to the information on our website at all times that you can click on it and see the information, a lot of the same information that was in the budget book, but now it's going to be in these links in the future. So if you take a look at right now, this is how it will actually kind of click on our website. When we get you the link, you'll click on accounting and budgeting, and you'll click on that and you go to the current year budget. It will take you over here to the current year budget, and you'll actually see all the areas about our budget, our organizational summary, development of process and what it entails, our actual certified budget that we adopted in April, and all of our different funds and descriptions and history, longitudinal data within those funds that will appear in this and stuff. And then all the books will be archived here, that you can go back and look at all the old books that are existing there, and this will be here. And this is something that this will be something new for the board, but I think ultimately you will like that, and it will be there for the public as well to see that, and it'll be a nice and way for them to be able to click on things and get to things very quickly, instead of trying to scroll through a book, which is on the line, can take you a while to get to a certain spot. This one, you'll be able to say, I want to see debt service. Click on the debt service, it'll take you right there, and you can see all the information. So I think ultimately you'll like this, but it's a little bit different. And also, I want to give a lot of kudos to the staff, because this was a very challenging year. With regard to, especially with the derecho. We actually lost 2 full weeks of work to be able to get our books closed and get things filed on time. And I'm pleased to say that we did get our financial reports, our books closed, and we got our CAR filed on time with the state. Even though the state did grant schools across the state a couple like 10-day extension, but we were able to do it on time. And that is due to a lot of extra work that Sherry Lusky and their staff did to get this done. I also want to give some kudos to Sarah Brown as well, that she helped kind of revamp this presentation and help with the kind of thinking of revamping the whole budget look and how that is going to move forward in setting this up for the budget document, line item budget documents. So now I'm going to open this up for questions.
Does any of the board, well, first of all, Dave, thank you for the presentation. It's great to see financially we are doing well as a district. And so I thank you and your staff for that. But I'd also like to open it up to our board members to see if they have any questions regarding your financial highlights.
President Humbles, I do have a question. I'm wondering if you could go back just to slides 7 and 8 and just provide like a 2 or 3 sentence explanation of spending authority.
Okay, spending authority. Spending authority is kind of like, if you want to think about our funding is based on a number of kids, and everything is based on a per pupil allocation. And your spending authority is you take all that number and what previous authority that you had earned, you never lose it. You can continue that on the next year. And you take a look at that and you say, okay, I have a credit card balance. You take those number of kids and you multiply this amount, and I had this much in savings. You add those two numbers together, that gives you how much money you can legally spend. And but it's not necessarily how much money you have in the bank. It's what you can legally spend. So if you think about going back to this year, you can see here, back in FY12, legally, we had the ability to spend $19.7 million. But in our bank, we only had 11 million. We didn't have the money to be able to spend all of that. But legally, we had the authority to do that. And how do you get that money? You can go levy dollars to get that money to be able to spend some of this authority. So right now, we actually are in the point of we have legal authority now to spend 18, and we have more money than what we have to spend. So and people wonder, why do we have all this extra money that we can't even spend? Well, we have cash flow. We have to be able to meet our bills in the summer when we don't get state aid in the summer. And those expenditures still come, and we need that extra money to be able to pay our bills in the summer. That's the main driving force. But it's really, if you think about unspent balance, that's what you legally have to be able to spend. It's kind of like your credit card balance, and even any savings that you have to be able to spend that's added to that.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
I have a question. Dave, I grabbed my binder while you were talking so I could look up a couple things, but you talk about, I think it might've been on slide 8, where that sweet spot is 5 to 10%, and that was a board goal. What is it about that range that's important, and is that something we're trying to get back to?
See, what's important, this was established years ago recommended by the School Board Association in association with the state. It said, what is a good number to shoot for your percentages with unspent balance, fund balance? That is something that they looked at, and they've actually had conversations a couple of years ago saying, should that number be increased? Okay, but typically, when you're at 5 to 10%, you are at a good spot that if you see something starting to slide, you have a little bit of time to be able to make adjustments to keep you from getting to a negative position. And also at a 5 to 10%, at a 5%, you're probably going to have a hard time making your payrolls in the summer without borrowing money to make it happen. Okay. Typically what that process is, you issue anticipatory warrants to be able to borrow the money to make your payroll, and then you pay that back when the state aid comes in. And so, and at one point in time, and that a program used to be out there, and it's still there, it's called ICE-CAP. And it was a program that everybody used to participate in. And in fact, it used to generate you additional revenue, because the money that you borrowed, they would turn around and they have that money for, and they invest that money. They have it sitting out there for you. They invest that money, and then the returns on that investment from those funds actually generated you more revenue for you. But now the market's upside down. That is not the case anymore. And so it is a number that 5 to 10%. At a 10%, you're probably pretty good that you're going to make all your payrolls without having to borrow. Now, when you get above that, because maybe in some schools, maybe that's not quite enough. You might need a little bit extra to make your payrolls. But the thing is too, why you see a lot of people having much larger numbers here is because of, when we had a 10% across the board cut, there was a lot of fear in schools. You cut that money and people were having a hard time. And then you had people socking away money authority in case that state would come back and take some of that money away. And that drove a lot of these balances up because of that 10% across the board cut. I'm not sure if I totally answered your question, but that's.
You did. It's not
All right.
bad to be where we're at. That's what I wanted to just kind of reinforce, and thanks for answering my newbie question.
This is Gary. I would just add that from a legislative point, when we have those unspent balances, when they get too high, we continue to say we don't have enough funds. The state legislators have come back and said, well, wait a minute, you're sitting with all this cash and you're asking for more funds, but you still, you have funds that you're not using. So I think there needs to be a temperament to how high we go with that unspent balance too.
Any other questions from the board?
I have one follow-up question, President Humbles. I asked this question at our last meeting, and I'll ask it again just to see if we have any further clarification about the impact on the budget because of COVID precautions that we're needing to take and extra resources that requires. And then on top of that, derecho, as board members, is there anything that we need to know or be prepared for? Any changes in our proposed budget? Anything that we may have to amend later? I know you said last time, Dave, that there's just a lot of unknowns with the government and FEMA and how this will all play out. But I just want us to be aware as a board and transparent to the community if there are anything that we should be aware of.
As of, we don't have a whole lot of extra information from what I shared last time. We submitted our claims through June to FEMA, and it can take a while for you to hear whether or not they're going to approve or deny our requests that we have already submitted. We are actually pulling together our second claim to send. And like I said, we are sending things for our PPE type of expenditures to FEMA. And those types of expenditures that we have, we just don't know where it's going to land at this point in time. And so, but we are, we're still okay on our COVID finances that we received funding from the state. We're still okay. We have the state also gave us some additional influx of money from what they call the GEARS fund, which is a part of CARES, but they gave us some additional funding. That we were able to shift from our CARES budget, normal CARES allocation, to the GEARS fund for the hotspots that we have purchased. So that freed up some money to be able to help us if FEMA denies some of PPE. We have availability there to be able to help offset some of those expenses that we have to shift over because of the FEMA dollars maybe not being there. So right now we're still sitting okay there, but we're just starting the year out. And so as the year continues on and we're continuing to purchasing all of our hand sanitizer, additional mask, and all of those types of expenses, we're tracking expenses such as the time that we're spending in cleaning the buses in between routes, disinfecting, because we're using some transportation staff to do that, and we're tracking that information so that we can code that to either COVID if we have the money available, or we can actually know what that cost us in case we have to go back to the school budget review committee to ask for additional authority to offset those expenses that we weren't able to have enough money for. But as of right now, we don't have a whole lot to know with COVID. Derecho, we're still waiting. I mean, I know it's taken a long time to go through all our facilities, to gather all the numbers, to pull together complete numbers for us to know what our estimates are. And they're still gathering that information. But I am pretty confident that, majority of these expenditures will flow through our insurance. So we will see very little from the district, from the derecho as expenses directly related, because majority of this is going to be picked up for insurance. Some of the areas that are still up in the air and questionable are that we don't know for sure, or like renting of facilities that we're doing in the meantime. We don't have 100% clarity on whether or not they're going to pick up those expenses, but we're recording those separately so we know what those expenses are so that we can share that. For example, like swimming, Limar was willing to allow us to rent the pool time from them using the pool. And so we're tracking all those expenses. And so that if we have, any of some expenses that we're incurring for the locations for hubs, if we're incurring expenses on that, we're tracking that so that we can hopefully get some insurance money back from those expenses as well.
Okay, I'll throw this out there. I was in a conversation with Congresswoman Finkenauer about COVID, federal government response to COVID and help with derecho. She did put forth an offer of her legislative assistant, Max Ernst, to sit down and talk with us about how to best work with FEMA. So if there is any interest in that, if you think that's helpful, Dave, we can get that set up.
Yeah, I think, as soon as we get the numbers from our insurance, we'll be able to see what things that our insurance is picking up and to see what things are left, possibly that are being missed by our insurance. And maybe at that point in time, we'll have a better feel for what we would need to be able to go to FEMA for.
Okay.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from the board? Once again, Dave, thank you. Thank you for keeping us informed as a board member, and great questions from the board too. Next is the resolution regarding the scheduling of a public hearing for the issuance of the school infrastructure sales service and use tax revenue refunding bonds, excuse me. Do we have a motion for the resolution?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Do we have any further discussion? This requires a roll call. Laurel?
Director Tominski,
Aye.
Director Anhalt,
Aye.
Director Garlock,
Hi.
Director Borcherding,
Aye.
Director Newman,
Aye.
Director Merschbach,
Aye.
President Humbles.
Aye. Well, last on our agenda for this evening is the continuation of our work session regarding board norms and goals. This session will be facilitated by Superintendent Bush. I turn it over to you, Superintendent Bush.
Thank you very much, President Humbles. And we will spend about the next hour and a half together refreshing our memories of where we left off. Actually, it was late winter. That's so long ago. It's our last work session around norms and board goals and the strategic plan. I don't know, I'm going to look at Secretary Day if we want to take any sort of break at this point in time. We just want to keep rolling. I just want to make sure that we're going to keep rolling. So I'm going to share my screen. I know that Secretary Day sent some documents ahead of time so that you all could review our former strategic plan as well as the board goals, and then notes from our IASB facilitator. So those are the 3 working documents that I will be using to guide our discussion. And I'll be prompting some things, but really we'll use Zoom norms for our discussion tonight. And I will help facilitate that. So be prepared to unmute yourself when we're looking at board discussion for this work session. A little unique, of course, that we're doing this via Zoom. So let me share my screen with you. All right, and if I could see thumbs up if you can see my screen. Awesome, thank you. Okay, I just want to move my dial here. Okay, very good. All right, here we go. So as you know, this is all of our work, all guided towards the same vision. The board vision is not different than the district vision. And so of course, everything that we do is focused on every learner in our district being future ready for what they need to do in their future. So that makes it simple for all of us in being direct alignment around the same vision. In January, we used these norms as a working team, especially as we had such new membership to the board, to guide our work. And so these were 5 norms that we use when we meet together that we can operate and communicate as a team. I would just ask that we take a moment to take a look at these 5 norms. And if you think about each one of them, what does that mean to you as a board member when at the board table or during our work sessions? So just take a look at these 5 norms, and then I'm going to ask a question in just a moment. So review these 5 norms and think about that and from a board point of view. And now I'm going to invite you to consider the takeaways as well as some of the notes we had from IASB during our work session last January. There were 3 sections of notes in your document. One was takeaways, second area was activities, and a third area was going forward. I'm going to ask that you focus on the takeaways right now and the going forward. And what I'm going to do is a quick screen switch and bring up some of those reminders that we have from that particular document. So from Harry, there are takeaways and the going forward notes. So as we look at that document, I'm going to ask, what are we doing well? And what areas do we need to continue to focus on? So when we go think about these norms, do these norms help us achieve our takeaways, especially around communications at the board table, and the things that we wanted to accomplish around communications going forward? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If you have Harry's document in front of you, that's awesome. I'm going to pull up some notes on the screen so that you can also see it via the screen share. So I'm going to stop sharing at the moment. Can you give me a thumbs up if you have Harry's document in front of you, the IASB document? I'm looking at all board members have it, so maybe I don't need to pull it up on the screen. That's great. Awesome.
Gary has a thumbs down.
Thumbs down. All right. So Gary, I'm just going to show a few bullet notes around the takeaways. And what I'm zooming in on are some communications bullet notes that we highlighted as a team that we wanted to make sure that we accomplished. And actually, why don't I just read those aloud really quick for you, Gary? One was communication was a theme. How do we provide structure for communication? 2, that communication is key. And there was a third note that communication themes continued to surface and the board really wanted continuous improvement and structures for reflective practice. And how can our norms help us accomplish that? So that's it in a nutshell. So I'm going to go back then to the screen share. And I'm going to ask and invite you all to a conversation at this point in time to think about those communication goals and takeaways and which of these norms are we doing well and which of these norms might we need to continue to focus on or need some support around. So I'll put the norms back up on the screen. What are we doing well and what might we need to continue to focus on for support as we continue our work together? So at this point in time, I would invite the board to the conversation about what we're doing well, and let's start there. And you can unmute yourself when you're ready to converse.
I think one of the things that we do well is the willingness to consider others' perspectives. And I think as a board, we need that. And also to hear everyone's voices. Because we all come from different walks of life and have different things that we bring to the table.
I would suggest that we're committed to the student-focused action. It's been a little distracting with some of the issues we've had to deal with as far as COVID, but I think we still come around even when we're looking at how do we provide the instruction and how do we restart school and so on, that we were really also looking at the student and the equity for all students, such as the hotspots and making sure that the one-to-one computers or laptops or whatever were distributed and used and so on. So I think even with the distractions of the COVID, we still have been committed to what's best for students, for all students.
Nancy, can I ask, or Nancy, I'm sorry, Noreen, I sit on a committee where I meet with your sister Nancy on a Zoom meeting every other week. So I'm not sure if I meant Nancy Humbles or Nancy Smith. Anyway, sorry. Are we, when you say what are we doing well, are you talking about us as a board or us as a district or both?
As a board, when you are working together, whether it be a work session or a meeting, or even communications to prepare for a meeting, which of these norms are we, as the board, doing well?
I would say that I think one thing that I feel has improved even since we met was the equity in voice. Just the simple process of when there's an opportunity for a question to limit to 2, a simple process like that helps us get around. I think certainly we're dealing with some pretty big issues, so you still kind of feel like you run out of time because you're trying not to have a 4-hour meeting. But I know as a person that's new to the board, you tend not to want to be the first to speak and kind of sit back and listen to your more experienced board members. But I thought that was a huge improvement. I would, with the student focused action, I think we do that well, but there's a part of me that just wishes that, that's not necessarily talking about a student voice. And I think a lot of the things that we're doing are considering the student's voice. I just know that I feel more informed when we actually hear from them, not just what we think or, hey, my kid thinks this, or, the teachers and the administrators are speaking on behalf of the students. We do surveys, right? So, I mean, you are definitely getting that, but even that is probably more the family voice. So I just feel like we're, those times where I can look back over the last several months where students were the ones giving us the information, and there was just no question, this is what they want, and this is the action that's focused on them. So I'd like to see us continue to move and improve on that.
Yeah, I'd like to speak about the first and the last bullet point. I think partially because of the challenges that we've faced this year, it's been important as a board to also consider the perspective of our staff and our work groups, and know that we all have the same intention, and that is to do the best thing that we can for our students and our families. And I think this board in particular and the administration is very open to conversations with the work groups and trying to figure out how we all move in the right direction together. So I feel really, really good about those.
Any other feedback of celebrations around these norms?
I do think that we are becoming more adept at being able to focus our work and tie questions back to the strategic plan and to board priorities. I think that we're developing that as a group and moving forward with that focus in mind much better.
So thank you for that feedback. I'm going to take a look at that next slide again of the second question, which was, what are areas we need to continue to focus and support? So these would be areas of improvement for us around those norms. So this would be during work sessions, board meetings, and just board work. I would invite maybe a little, Director Tominski, your comment might be a celebration, but also is maybe generating a hope for. And so that is something to consider as well. It could be an improvement for us too.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I'm often pretty bad at following instructions. I kind of jumped ahead to that one. So my apologies, but I think you're right. I think there's certainly areas to celebrate that I want to call out, and then, but certainly areas that I think there's a huge opportunity for us to move forward with that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just, while I was on unmuted, to say that I know that we've talked about getting more of these work sessions together. And I do think that when I think about willingness to consider other perspectives, to create those environments where we can do that. And I feel like these work sessions can easily provide that type of platform. The formality of the board meeting makes it sometimes a little bit more difficult. So getting into, it's still recorded, it's still available to the public, but I think that we can, just have an open discussion and then hear those perspectives. And much like Cindy was, kind of looking at that first and last bullet point, I think those two, they work together so well that I think that we should be assuming positive intent. And I think more often we do. And I think the more we hear people's voice in those types of work sessions that we could be having. I think that would be a benefit for us.
Well, and I think too, having the work sessions, and I agree, it brings us together as a board, and also to answer questions that some may not be certain. So we want everyone to grow as a board member. And I think, yes, we come to board meetings and it is pretty formalized, but these work sessions allow us to have a better understanding too, what each board member is concerned about, what we need to work on as a board to strengthen us as a board, because there has been a lot, and I will go back to our new board members, that you've had to experience. You were elected last November and we're in September, and we've all gone through a lot. So, and you guys have learned a lot and I think coming back together has been helpful so we can regroup, and we always want to get better at what we do. So I appreciate the work sessions too.
I'm going to do this a little backward here because it's going to sound like I'm saying this is more like a celebration. I like that we have a topic, which is the best way to do it to stay in compliance with freedom of information anyway. It needs to be on the agenda. But when we have a work session, we have one topic. If we are doing, this is where I get to that, something I think we could do better. If we get to the point where we are doing work sessions on a more regular basis, and requesting those, I really appreciate the staff information at the end of the board meeting, but I also really appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation with my fellow board members and not, have a email conversation here and a text conversation here and a phone call here. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody and hear where everybody's at. I learn from every one of you when I hear your perspectives. So, I know some boards do work sessions a lot, quite a bit more regularly. I'd just like to signal my interest in doing that more regularly as well.
Yeah, I agree with Jen, and I think that falls into the second bullet point on continuous focus on big picture systems. And I think as we identified in our last work session, communication is something that was a theme from our last work session. And I think communication amongst the board is one of those systems that I think could be improved. And like Jen said, more of these work sessions is always helpful. I think more communication with our president and vice president. I know all conversations that I have with both of you are always very helpful, especially as a new board member. Just like some of the mechanics of who do I ask, what do I do with this information, where do I go with it? Is it appropriate to bring up at a board meeting? So I don't know, just like making those more frequent or more regular, maybe.
If I could jump in with I don't know, maybe even a suggestion that in order to comply, is there a way we could comply with the open meeting, have it on the agenda that somewhere at the end of the meeting that we could have a dialogue about big picture systems or whatever, that we would be able to have somehow a more clarifying discussion among board members on an issue that comes up during the board meeting, or wanted to, just something that we were in question about.
So I would say that certainly there's possibilities. Anything that's on the consent agenda, you do have the opportunity to pull an item for discussion, and that can be an open discussion with the board. Any of the learning and leadership presentations, it's really kind of that dialogue that we have with admin's presentations, such as what Director Nicholson presented tonight. However, I think what you're describing, Director Anholt, would be, I guess, what I would call a mini work session, and it could be work session. And I would keep it focused though on the strategic plan and board goals. And then what threads through there might surface from that evening's board meeting, but that would always be kind of an ongoing work session that might meet what Director Newman and Director Garlock had also highlighted.
Well, I agree. You know, I think there's always that fear that we get into micromanaging, and so it's looking at, we stay focused on the big picture and the overall system. But as I said, one of the things that I found coming on the board was isolation, might say, that didn't feel like we had a lot of opportunity to have the board discussion. We were so confined by agenda and so on. And it was frowned upon to have side conversations, really. So I think if we could somehow incorporate that into our regular meetings, I think it would go a long way to strengthen our collaboration as a board.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's helpful about these norms is absolutely we want to follow the law. And therefore, if we have these work sessions, they are in open meetings. Therefore, you're not worried about having these mini sidebar conversations. It's really a meeting within the public's eye that gives the board that opportunity for this collaboration that you all are describing. So very good. Other pieces of feedback of growth areas for us around these norms. And I'm even hearing suggestions of not just a growth area, but how you might want to accomplish it. So any other feedback for around our norms?
David touched on something earlier, and I wonder if this is what he meant when he said it. And I'm not sure if this really falls under equity and voice, because I think that's more amongst board members, but maybe commitment to student-focused action. It would be really nice to hear more from students. And I know they probably don't want to come present to our board, but that's an excellent opportunity in public speaking when that happens. I know we have the school board foundation or the school foundation come present. Could there be an alternating schedule, even once a quarter? Maybe that doesn't work with student schedules, but where we do hear from, we're talking about starting Black student unions, and we're talking about social justice in our schools. Could we get updates from some of those types of leadership opportunities for students at where they come talk to the board about their progress? Not every meeting if that doesn't work, but it is really nice to hear directly from the students, and the town halls were really cool. And when the students spoke at it was one of our very early board meetings, that was very impactful and really helpful to hear where they were coming from.
I'm writing this down with a big star, and part of this, admittedly, my heart hurts of what the spring and the summer did to our work or your work, because usually we would have at least some more opportunities, especially in the spring, of celebrations of learning and hearing from our students. But I love what you've just said also about connecting it to a strategic plan work, a product, and then hearing from kids, how's it actually working? So I've written that down for alignment and then hearing from students. So thank you.
Oh, one last question there. Are there any boards where they have student representation at all, or is that not really?
No, you have to be an elected official to be on the board. Now, if it's an elected student who's 18, ran for the board and is on the board, that's how a student can be on the board. Very rare. But no, their invitation would actually be to come speak during public comment. And they could attend every meeting. They could provide feedback during public comment. I will have an advisory board, and you all could not all attend, but an individual board member or even two might be able to attend those advisory boards. But yeah, they can't sit on a board seat unless they're elected to do so.
Are you talking about the student advisory board that you shared about in your update?
Yes. Yeah.
That's right there is a prime example of students we'd love to hear from.
And I think it's great too that we are having a student advisory board. Like Jen said, their voices, we get to hear them. So it is nice that you are forming the student advisory because they're in our schools and they can provide us with some additional information.
I could be wrong, but I thought, and I'll have to do some checking, that some school boards have had students on the board, but they're non-voting. So if they, if they're non-voting member of the board, I don't think that would be illegal because they without a vote, they really can't have an impact on an action. But I like the idea of what Superintendent Bush is talking about, her student advisory council or whatever. But I would like to see some members of that council actually in attendance at our board meeting and have a place just like some of our other administrative positions have that are sitting out there, such as our director of elementary and secondary education and Dave and so on, so that we would have the opportunity to question them directly or to have them give regular input. Again, we're about, it's about education of the students, and I think the students should have a voice in what we're doing for them.
Plus, they can see how exciting our board meetings really are.
Very good. I've taken those notes. Any other last notes of feedback here for these working norms and stretch areas for the team? So what I would ask then at this point in time, if you all have a writing utensil, piece of paper, even if you'd prefer to use your phone and use it as a way to document something, I would ask as we move forward for the rest of the evening, we continue to use these working norms. We've unpacked them a little bit in this conversation, even have some celebration areas, but also some areas we'd like to continue to work on. So as we move forward, you know that we'll be talking more about our strategic plan work as well as the board goals. So by the end of this evening, which will be in 1 hour from now, what might be one hope you have when we leave together tonight? So if you would take just a minute to reflect on one hope that you have as we continue the evening, 1 hour from now, what would be that one hope? And then we're going to take just a minute and share what those hopes would be before we get into the strategic plan and goal work. I can see your faces on the screen. And so if you would just give me a thumbs up if you're ready to share a hope, and a thumbs to the side if you need just another thought, second or two. So just give me a thumbs up if you're ready. I'm seeing up, up, up. I'm seeing Director Tominski praying to the, awesome, thank you. Director Merschbrock, you're good? Yep, awesome, thank you, awesome. So I am going to use my Brady Bunch screen. I'm going to give you a little feel of how our teachers are facilitating digital learning. So they're using a lot of nonverbal skills. On the top of my Brady Bunch, I have President Humbles first, Director Tominski, and then Director Anhalt. So we're going to go in that order if you don't mind. President Humbles, if you wouldn't mind initiating our launch of our hopes for the evening. So I'm going to open it up for you.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. And my hope for this evening, that as board members, that we have a clearer understanding of our roles and responsibilities, and when not certain or we don't know, that we will ask for help and guidance from our other board members. That's what I'd like to see, because I think sometimes we're not sure what our roles are as a board member, and just the clarification of that. So folks don't have a fear of not knowing, because when I stepped on the board years ago, my first year, I was lost. But we had board members that would take the time to share that information. So my hope is that we all strengthen our knowledge as board members and know what our roles are and feel good about what we do.
Thank you, President Humbles. Director Tominski.
Ditto on that. I think the thing that I wrote down was that that we're all engaged and that all of our voices are truly heard. Not that we all just speak, but that we all actually take the time to truly listen to what our peers are saying.
Thank you. Director Anhalt.
I hope that as we go through our board goals, we are able to identify some measurements ways of measurement that we'll be able to, as we move through the year, be able to identify or be able to measure the success or level of success that we have on those board goals.
Thank you. And so I'm going to the second row now. That will include Director Garlock, Director Borcherding, and Director Newman. So if you wouldn't mind, Director Garlock, getting us started.
Sure. One of the things that is hard to do on Zoom that is always easier to do in person is to have an actual discussion of thoughts. That's been a little difficult for me, especially in the time of Zoom, that we get two questions and then we move on. And sometimes it's like when you're listening to someone else ask a question, you're like, oh, I have something I'd like to clarify. And I think that holds true for what we're doing here right now in our work session as well, that it's more interactive than one of us speaking at a time without any feedback from any of our fellow board members. So I hope for more open discussion.
Thank you. And I will cue you, that will happen during our goals. We're just going to have to monitor the mute business. Thank you. And next, Director.
That cut out, is it me? Okay. All right. So similar to what Gary had said, and this is actually based on a conference when I went to IASB last year or the year before, there was a session that talked about board evaluation. And right now, the only way that this board has to evaluate itself is based on the superintendent's achievement of superintendent goals and the superintendent's review, which is, I think, helpful. Certainly it directs our work, but I think also as a body, I would like for us to develop some kind of method or standard so that we can have a baseline, so that we can do a self-evaluation as a board and as a body to see where we can focus our efforts for forward momentum.
Thank you much. And then Director Newman, and then Director Merschbach, you're going to punctuate us after Director Newman. Thank you.
Well, I appreciated what Jennifer just said, or Director Borcherding. I'll be more formal here. My hope for tonight is that we come out of this prioritizing communication and we have some clarity and feel purpose in how we serve the district.
I'll go last then. I agree. That first meeting we talked about communication, and I think we need to have some commitment going forward to communication. And we've talked about a lot of things already tonight, but all of those board norms and establishing board goals, so we're all on the same page, rowing in the same direction. The communication part of it is going to have to come first. And so I agree. That's what we should try to get out of tonight.
Thank you all very, very much. Nice to create a generalized hope spot for where we hope to go. And so obviously we have an hour together and won't be able to get too far down in the weeds, but I think already what I'm hearing from you is you'd like to set a direction and then continued work together in a format where you can have better dialogue and perhaps future, I don't know if they're mini work sessions or continued work sessions. So hopefully we can set the direction tonight and then follow up with the ongoing work. So very good. So I'm going to come back and share my screen. I'm going to provide a high level overview of our district strategic plan, which is really teeing up much of the board goal work, but then also you have other things that are outside of the strategic plan around, I think, what President Humbles highlighted, and that is knowing roles and responsibilities. So some of your goals are around that as well. So we'll evaluate where we are and then edit and decide where we want to go next. So I will share my screen again. And we'll continue to use these norms for our work and our discussion. To Director Garlock's point, we're going to have more of an open discussion as we get into the goal work. I would like to get some feedback on the strategic plan and the next iteration of that strategic plan as well. So we're gonna do a little bit of back and forth. I'll share a screen and then we'll look at then I'll stop sharing so that we can have a more open discussion with each other and watch each other. Okay. So just as a reminder, our strategic plan is, as a district, is divided into 4 major focus areas: culture, student learning, workforce, systems, and resources. Under all of those, we have strategies, we have measures. And so when we bring presentations to the board from the leadership team, it's all connected to the strategic plan work, as well as the measures where we're trying to find our successes with the strategic planning work. So formally, this is last year's strategic plan. Just as a note, this is not new work. This is continued work. So in the fall of 2017, we launched a 5-year strategic plan. It went through a 2-year iteration. Last year was its 3rd year of implementation. These were those identified strategies. And as we've tried to get a clear, narrow focus as an entire district, this particular strategic plan was intended to simplify the work. But as we've used the document, the leadership team did some reflections as well. And we thought, how can we even make improvements for this particular year? Despite the pandemic, despite derecho, the focus doesn't change. Our vision is still clear, our mission is still clear, and how we want to measure student growth and learning is still clear. So on the next screen, I'm going to share with you a current iteration of the admin's team of revising this, tweaking it, I should say, to continue the work. Just one note, we did not incorporate the Return to Learn plan in the 5-year strategic plan work because that was really relevant for this year. We'll continue to publish that. It continues to influence what our work is, but all of the Return to Learn plan is connected to the work that we were already doing. So I would say around digital literacy, technology plans, social emotional learning. So it was nice to have those anchors in our strategic plan so that we could move the work forward. So I'll just share the next slide with you that shows you a little bit of a change in regards to the format as well as some of the focus. So if you can see at the top, we took the system indicators and really tried to highlight them as a pronouncement of something we measure from all of our focus areas. We pronounced our equity goal as the first, a growth goal, that's a student achievement goal, and a proficiency goal. These were formally together and we called it a student achievement goal. We thought it was important to pronounce one as a growth goal, second as a proficiency goal, and then finally our graduation rate. We want to get your feedback tonight. We thought it would be a good idea to indicate where we started our goal in 18-19. Although the strategic plan started in 2017, the first year we took the ISASP was in 18-19. We didn't have the opportunity to take that assessment again last spring, so we've only taken it one time. We're really using that as our baseline data. So that is one note for this particular blank, is that we would call out for the equity goal an ELL data point, an IEP data point, and a race data point. So you would actually have 3 indicators underneath one equity goal. So that would be true for the growth goal and the proficiency goal. We'd be using the ISASP data from 18-19, and then we would project what the goal metric actually is, and then graduation rate from 2017, since that was the launch of the strategic plan. Just would invite your feedback on those system indicators. Would that be something that the board would like to see pronounced on our strategic plan? Those actual metrics, formally they were not, we just had the narrative. And we would love to hear your feedback on that piece before we jump into the focus areas, or anything else you'd like to see as we look at those system indicators on the strategic plan. So I'm going to now invite a little bit of conversation around those system indicators. Would take your feedback.
Thank you. I think this is, I would like to see, so I guess I have a question, is that, are we only going to see these growth numbers between 18-19 and 2022, for example, or will we see annual updates to those system indicators? In the strategic plan, I know that we as a board and the public will see updates for each of those system indicators in board meetings, but I'm wondering if this is a living document and if it's something that's kind of being continually updated, if that's going to be included in the strategic plan, or are we waiting until we hit 2022 to put those numbers out there? Additionally, I would like to encourage us to think about flexibility in that 2022 year. I think that we've had some major disruption instructionally, and we need to be flexible when we're thinking about, those were some pretty aggressive goals to start with. And I think that we just need to be flexible in thinking about the dates if that is achievable.
So we would provide an annual update. Our hope is also to have this as a living space on our website with hyperlinks to the data so that people could easily access it. That does not exist right now. I love that Dave Nicholson said earlier that we're getting into the next iteration around our financial documents. We need to do the same on our strategic plan to have living links to the work. So yes, we would want to be able to provide that as an annual metric on the strategic plan. And it is only an annual metric, is that it's based on ISASP, which is taken only once a year. There are lots of other indicators, but that's the system indicator.
I think that's great. I think that's strong, and that it's going to be a living document, and that it's going to be easy to find on the website. I think that is very helpful for the public. I think it's helpful for the board. I think it's helpful for our staff. I really appreciate that addition. Thank you.
And keeping that information current too. So when we go in, people, it's that we stay on top of that and we don't have old information and we're in another year. So I think that that will be very helpful.
We won't see those assessments until next spring. Is that correct? The state assessment?
Correct. It will be taken in the spring, late April to May. And then we will actually, because it's electronic, we hope to get that feedback and report to the board by June. We'll see how we do with the state getting that back to us, but that would be our hope, is that to have a June update.
I was just going to say that at NewBoCo, we have what's called an outcomes dashboard. So it does not only show you where you are, but those, like what Vice President Borcherding was saying, you would see that data between. And I think it would be useful. Our ideal would be to make it real time, like our outcomes dashboard, but like the amount of work that it takes to do that is insane. But to have a commitment of when will that information be updated. So if you were to see that and it's like, all right, well, 2020, 21 data is not there, but you can expect to see it June, whatever, you know, to try to make that commitment to ourselves and to the community of like, this is when we expect to see this number. But yeah, when we were looking at that first one, that's the first thing that I'm thinking to myself. I'm like, increase 20%, like where did we start? So to see that iteration made perfect sense to me. So yeah, 100%. And I think those are the right numbers. I don't, you know, I mean, those still look accurate to me. I don't know if that was part of the question too, but the more concrete data that we have that we can represent. And I would say, like, I would push, like, I understand that we've gone through a really hard year and those might've been really aggressive goals, but I just want us to keep our foot on the gas and not be like, hey, you know what, now we've got some excuses to not hit those numbers. Like, I would love to hit those numbers a couple years earlier and then repoint at the sky, you know, not say, hey, guess what, we're done. And I think I speak for all of us that that's the way we feel. So seeing that in real, like as close to real time as we can get. So even if it's just that annual report that comes out, will help us see how much work we've got left to do.
Other feedback on the system indicators?
I like the system indicators. I think that's a good change in format, that those are very obvious and at the top of the page. Maybe this is more of a question than a comment, but we have had a very rough end of last school year, start to this school year. And if we leave that achievement goal at 20%, what sort of message does that send to our staff? Are they going to feel a lot of extra pressure? It's like, oh my gosh, you know, we haven't had these kids in the classroom and now they still expect us to reach these goals. So can you enlighten us as to how does this then get communicated to the staff, and what will the expectations be for them if we leave that at 20%?
Thanks for that question. We did discuss this as a leadership team, and talked, I think what happened is we unpacked more of these formative measures, and I'm just going to kind of highlight my screen here that we have our FAST measures that we use K6, and that also now this year includes math. And then we have some iReady data that we've been using at the middle school level, specifically around literacy. And then this year we're also inviting what's called the NWEA MAP metric as a formative tool perhaps to use at the high school, just a pilot conversation around that right now. But what we found, and I think I could speak on behalf of our teachers, or what they tell me, this FAST data is such a driver for them in how they're developing instruction. We use it as a formative assessment tool. It's a screener, but it helps inform us of what our kids need. So I don't think that the system indicators, they're not necessarily what we're using to drive instruction. It's rather an annual dipstick showing how we're doing on our goals. But I do think that we haven't had the second opportunity to take those ISAPS tests. If you'll recall, we had a huge celebration in February of how much we have moved the dial in 1 year. We no longer have schools that are in those categorized areas and the Iowa School Performance Profile as being the emergency situation. And so that growth based on the new tool and all of our school improvement metrics, I hope we would continue to move the dial, but I do think you're right, Director Garlock, this spring is going to be a real tell for us to see how are we doing the second time around with this ISASP tool, and are we showing improvement, and are we moving the dial? Or I think goals are goals, but they're also intended to be a place where you're headed. They're also meant to be evaluated, and how are you doing, and how do you need to adjust? And so I think that our staff, I would hope, they're using some other things to really drive that annual that daily instruction. And this is that dipstick. I also think that if we don't meet the goals, that's okay. We just want to continue to show improvement. So we continue to show improvement, we continue to show growth. If we don't get there, then we might need to adjust more. But certainly that folks don't feel that level of pressure and punitive, rather something that's a destination. But how we create that culture is so important so that staff doesn't feel pressure and a punitive environment, rather something that is celebration and support.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That makes sense to me.
Will we be able to perform some of the FAST testing at the elementary level with our multiple ways of delivering instruction?
It's a daily grind of figuring that out right now. So yes, we are doing it in the virtual environment. They are a virtual assessment. And so the teachers are figuring it out right now with a lot of support and input. So yes, we are able to, and it is, I'm calling it a train ugly moment, in that what's working, what's not working, we're literally adjusting day by day. But we will be able to accomplish it, and we have to meet the state requirements.
Well, I'd like those kinds of tests. I'm not a huge fan, never have been, of the standardized test, but this is for improvement of instruction. And I think, again, we don't go so long without having some assessment. This has been some year, and I don't think it's a indicator of a failure on our part. It's just where the student's at and how much progress can we make as we move through the school year. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great point, in that the FAST is actually a screener for that exact purpose. How are our kids doing, especially now? Who needs what, and providing support to them. So absolutely, that's not intended to be a summative assessment tool. Other thoughts around those system indicators?
I do have an additional question. On the past iteration of the strategic plan, under equity, Was there can I see the updated of the, could you share that screen again? I believe we had in there a free and reduced category, and I don't know if that is there now. No.
Yes, it was. You're absolutely right. It was on the former plan. As we realize this is a public facing document, and also for our teachers, not everyone can have access to that data. And actually we can't do individualized identifiers with free and reduced. So we removed it. We could do it as a system and percentage, but we cannot share that publicly for down to the individual level.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you.
That was an excellent catch. I will be very excited to do some of our annual metric updates, especially around graduation rate. As soon as we have the state's certification around graduation rate from this spring, despite everything, I am confident we climbed. So we'll look forward to sharing that with you all. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. We're going to move from the system indicators, move down to the next level of the strategies. Not much has changed here. Just going to unpack with you a little bit of the alignment we've tried to put in the language. So as you can see on the screen, we've kept our purpose statements, and we've kept our measures. We changed or added two things I want to show you under culture. We've added a communications and engagement data. We also were more specific and said family engagement data. We've implemented some specific family engagement strategies, some goals that we've set around engaging our families. And so we look forward to, these are going to be some process metrics that we'll be able to share. We also created alignment and just made sure under all of our strategies, it was clear that those strategies all have plans behind them. Again, as this becomes a living document, we'll have hyperlinks to each one of those plans that our community will be able to see. We added the iReady as a measure under student learning, in that has been an implementation at the middle school that is showing middle school literacy instructional improvement. So we thought that was important to add. And then one more measurement we added in workforce was our employee retention data. We actually already have that data, we share it, but we thought it would be really important, let's call that out publicly, in that we do a pretty good job of retaining our employees, but when we talked about our diversity plan, we have work to do there. So we thought it would be really important to share not just employee retention, but employee retention by demographics and work areas. And again, we just created alignment in the language around our strategies. Strategies haven't really changed. I would just say our high reliability school improvement framework, we can attest a lot of our vertical alignment improvement to that language and to that work, and very, very proud of the implementation of that across our district. So would invite your feedback now around our focus areas. And what I would ask is that, is there anything here that you were hoping to see or that that perhaps may be absent that you would like to make sure that we're calling out on the strategic plan? I would add, under strategies and culture, we did add our anti-racism efforts there as well.
I do like the piece too in workforce. And I know that's one of the things that we have been working on, is diversifying our workforce. But I like the retention piece, because sometimes we can recruit, and if people don't feel that they fit in, it's just really easy to leave. So I like that focus, that the retention is an important piece on the workforce. But also when I look at the culture and I see that you added to the family engagement, I think that's so important that our families are engaged in the communication engagement. So I like that piece that has been added, especially the family engagement. The more engaged we can have our families, I think that also helps with the success of our students and our district. So I do like those two that have been added, well, three. And the anti-racism initiative plan, to see it, that is part, that is in our strategic plan, and that we are doing something about it. And based on the workshops or the sessions, that is a priority too. So I appreciate that too.
The anti-racism that we're speaking of, is that the IDI? Is that like under culture, or am I missing something?
So it is under culture, it's under strategies as the anti-racism initiatives plan. And that includes all of the things that were the themes that came from our sessions this summer.
Okay, I wasn't seeing it, that little, that slide bar was kind of covering that up. So just,
Right.
as I was looking at that, thinking about the earlier comment that it's a public document. And so is it clear? Is it in a place where it's evident that this is a focus? You know, I'm not saying I'm just looking for the word diversity to show up crystal clear, but I think that on first pass, it's possible to miss it. But you know, as you pointed it out under strategies, I see it on second glance.
I'm going to change the way that I'm sharing that a little bit so you can see it.
I have a question about the anti-racism as well. Since this is going to be a document that'll have links that'll tie back to the work that's being accomplished in those areas, is that also a place where the action items that were developed from the anti-racist town halls will show up and have links there to represent some data and some growth on that work area?
We intend to link it to now the anti-racism landing page that's on our website, which highlights where that work came from, which were the town halls, and then all the identified initiatives.
Excellent, thank you. I have a question about under student learning, under the measures. Is asked and graduation not there just because it would have been redundant to have that also under system indicators? Just to clean up the document.
That's exactly right. We decided to have the formative measures and then the system indicators above. So we did to not duplicate those. Exactly.
Under workforce development or workforce and strategies on workforce recruitment, at my IASB exec board meeting last week, I had a discussion with one of the IASB staff members about recruiting minority. And they suggested one of the things to do would be to have, and it might be something we're already doing, so I'm just maybe redundant, but to talk with the colleges of education, and if they could identify minority students that would be graduating, that we contact, if we could, individually, those students and invite them to our district, particularly the University of Iowa, since it's so close.
Yes, I can comment on that in that we have, with the three regents, Mount Mercy, Coe, and Drake have taken initiative with that strategy. We can't demand it, but we have asked and then done those extended invitations for our teacher recruiting fair that we host here. And then doing a specific call to those candidates, the diverse candidates from our local colleges. So that has been an extra effort, but yeah, excellent suggestion. Excellent suggestion since we're doing it already. No. Thank you.
I knew we'd be ahead of the game. I just had
that
to
was
throw it out.
I will say that is work due to the dedicated resource that the board put in place of that diversity recruiter. So that's why that's happening.
Perhaps this falls under things we're already doing, but I think it goes under student learning. Does one of those strategies refer, and I can't quite see that there, but I was trying to read it before it went away. Is there anything that really refers to our community partnerships, particularly with employers and training? I see Future Ready pathway course as a measure. Does it have a correlating strategy in there?
So the Future Ready pathway works specifically in regards to community partnerships, does the workplace learning connection, as well as, I'm just using that as one example, as well as the sector boards that we are connected to and several other community partnerships is pronounced in that Future Ready pathway work. So that would be a link to that plan. What we have not necessarily pronounced, and maybe this is more for our culture work, is our community partnerships, specifically with programs like Leaders, Believers, and Achievers, which also do Future Ready work. So we could do maybe a better pronouncement with some of those community partnerships and some of these strategic plans. Good point. So I'm going to ask for any other comments around the strategic plan work. And if there are none, we are going to transition to board goals, and that's where we're going to land our evening.
Before we move on, just one thought under student learning. You know, we've advanced our technology plan as far as putting the technology in a one-to-one across the board. We're ahead of schedule on that. What would be the next step then? What would be we doing to move forward in the area of technology?
So our 5-year technology plan was done in 18 months. Woo!
Again, we're ahead of schedule.
Right. We were way ahead of schedule. Tremendous work there. So we just had that discussion as well. The current plan will continue to exist in regards to implementation. I think what we're going to do is some monitoring of obviously our implementation, but we are going to resurface that technology committee and digital literacy team in the spring to reevaluate that technology plan. So we're living in really the implementation of that 5-year plan in its, I guess I would say it's really going to be in its 3rd year. But we will be definitely having to reevaluate and accelerate the work. So exciting, yet also exhausting, but definitely want to reevaluate the tech plan.
Well,
Already on the radar.
That's one of the disadvantages of being, once you meet a goal, then, you've got to reset that goal outcome. So we don't want to stand still, but we're always moving forward. So I appreciate it.
Great question. So thank you for your feedback. And I'll just say this, that we see this as a living, working document, especially now that we're going to make it more interactive. If there are continued feedback, please know that we're open to that. We certainly want to continue to take that feedback, but would like to shift the conversation to board goals that are certainly grounded in much of this work. Okay. So you have a board goals document that Secretary Day sent to you. It was part of the agenda and also was attached to the current strategic plan of the former strategic plan, the 1920 school year. It looks like this. I'm going to zoom up, and it has at the top board goals and priorities. And it's Roman numeraled 1 through 7. I have those goals on the screen. And then you also have some supporting subpoints under each one of those goal areas. So what I would like to do is guide you to have an open board discussion around your goals. We are going to use a strategy that we can use for open discussion and to help keep us focused. So if you haven't reviewed the board goals, I would just ask that you take a minute right now. Let's take 1.5 minutes, because I think that'll get us to 7:30. Review the goals, and then we're going to use a strategy to discuss the goals, which I think you've already had a lot of formative discussion tonight around these goals and how we might want to edit them. And again, this will be continued board work. So just take a minute, another minute and a half. We'll do that till 7:30 for you to review the goals, just to regenerate where you are. And I'll keep the headers up on the screen. So hopefully that you had a chance to read those, of course, prior to tonight, but just to reground ourselves in those board goals. These, of course, are the 7 headers, and then there's subtopics under each one of those. As I've been listening to you, even have pulled out some things that I think you want to continue to focus on. But what I would ask that you now do is think about this as a tool for feedback and discussion. I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to go straight to this particular strategy. So it's called the KISS strategy. And what I would ask that you do is under each of those 7 goal areas, what are goals that you would like to keep? A goal that perhaps you'd like to keep, but it needs improvement. Is there something that's missing and that you would like to start? Or is there a goal on there that you feel as though has been accomplished and you think it needs to be stopped? So next to each one of those 7 goals, I would just ask that you think about the KISS strategy. Is it a keep it goal, an improve it goal, a start it goal, or it doesn't exist yet, you'd like to start it, or a stop it goal? And then, and this is really just open for discussion. We could go goal by goal, if that would help the discussion. President Humbles, if you think that'd be okay, we could start with 1 and keep going, or we can just open this up for broad discussion of all 7.
I'm sorry. I think the broad discussion of all 7.
Sounds good. So I would open it up to the board at this point in time, and I will put those 7 headers up. And would open it up to board feedback at this point in time in discussion of what you'd like to keep, improve, start, or stop.
Just for clarification, is this, this is regarding the subpoints that aren't on the screen, correct?
Correct.
Does everyone have those in front of them? Could you give me a thumbs up if you do? Okay.
If we're going to just start with broad discussion, as I read through these, I thought a lot about the specific bullet points that I think are something the board is uniquely skilled at doing, and that would be working to build collective commitment of the community and staff. And that appears in a couple other ones too. It's how can we as a board be support in that, and how can we implement that? So I don't know where that sits at right now as far as, you know, have we as a board started that? Can we improve on it? I mean, I think it's keep and improve is what I'm getting at, but anywhere where it talks about our ability to be a support and foster commitment of the community, buy-in of the community, connecting to the community is what I'm particularly interested in.
Anyone else?
I mean,
Anyone
I'll certainly
Okay.
sorry.
No, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
No, I certainly second that. I don't see that coming out. So if it's in there, it seems like it's tucked away. The other thing that doesn't seem like it's showing up that I think belongs there is something related to social justice. So maybe it's tucked away someplace, but I'd like to maybe call that out and put that as a top line goal. There's something about 4 that just feels like it doesn't read as strong as I want it to. I don't know if enabling excellence and innovation feels like what I think that we should be doing, you know, and so I think a stronger word for that is something that I'd want to see. So, I mean, I don't know if that's kind of in line with what we're talking about, but I don't see anything that I'm like, oh my God, we should do. Yeah, I want to get rid of this one. There's nothing that I see that doesn't seem like it belongs. It's just that I feel like there's things that are not called out in a way that's strong enough.
So perhaps specifically the most recent work that we've been focused on around equity, make sure that it's aligned in some of the board language I could see
Right.
as a connection. And then as I'm looking at what both you and Director Newman have highlighted, I gravitate towards 3C. It's around student learning, but it's that collective commitment or the word fostering that you use, Director Newman, around fostering community engagement or fostering how to promote the work within the community was a strong verb. So I'm taking those notes as well.
Well, and I look at continually focus on student learning, number 3. And I like what it says, set and communicate high expectations, support conditions for high reliability. So when I look at this section here, I don't see anything that I would say we don't keep it, but I think it is important that we keep this. And I like that D, learn together as a board team by presentations at meeting through our professional associations and information shared with all of us by stakeholders. I like that one, number 3.
Kind of speaking a little bit more on point 3, there's a lot there that is reflective of our school improvement plan, and wonder if there's value in intentionally aligning those two so that we're, you know, emphasizing effective teaching, guaranteed viable curriculum, safe, supportive, and collaborative environment, as it would tie back to the school improvement plans that we're carrying across all our buildings. Just to have intentional reflective language there.
Was that number 3, did you say?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, yes, it was 3.
Yeah, and there's a little bit under 4 too. There's some effective teaching under 4 that would be, yeah.
think the improvement there comes in safety in many ways too. Just, I mean, even before the derecho, we had buildings that, you know, have some needs for improvements that are highlighted by COVID. And, you know, we need to be thinking about that too. And then the damage that was done that we'll be dealing with for a long time yet.
Not to say that we're looking for rubber stamping, but 5 around policy and 6 around the fiduciary and financial responsibilities of the board. Those are pretty robust and align annually to the work. So I think that if we updated the dates in there and you're feeling confident with that continued work, we could just do some updates. From everything that you provided feedback around within the norms, seems to be really around some of that visionary governance and partnership work as a board, as well as perhaps some of those, even the focuses on student learning and culture. How are you doing that? And work sessions. So we might want to pronounce a goal future with the how we intend to achieve it as a board. Because I'm hearing a lot about still those work sessions and wanting that constant feedback around those particular goal areas.
That is I like that idea. I think that's a really good note. I did want to point out though, that under point 6, the sustain and enhance district resources through continuous planning and fiduciary oversight, under C, point 1, 2, point 1 and 2, those can both be eliminated because those have both been achieved. The first one talks about changing some dates for the state extension, and the other one is communicating with legislatures the importance of the state extension passage, and that's happened, so we can remove those.
That is a stop goal. Way to go. Good feedback.
On number 6, the sustain and enhance district resources and so on, we talk about the facility plan. I think it's important that I know we're going to have, there's a gap between that we review the district plan because there's some demographics and some things that may have changed that would have an influence on the district facility master plan. So I think it's built into the plan to have those reviewed, but I guess I'm just pointing out the emphasis that it is going to be important and crucial that we do that.
And I think what is great too with the facilities master plan, we take a pause. And I think that will be helpful.
And additionally, I do think that I agree with that. I do think that originally when facilities was presented, buildings were identified based on need for repair or replacement. And I think that may have changed after derecho. So I think I would encourage administration to provide us a reevaluation of where we are with all of our buildings and their usability.
Our high schools will certainly be in better shape. So that's a good celebration. So I'm just going to ask an additional thought here as we're looking at these goals. Are there any that pop out to you that become a priority for board goal work based on the conversation we had this evening? And again, I'm thinking about that governance, visionary governance, and the way that we operate around the goals. I'm taking this feedback. I will be glad to edit the document, but it sounds like much of the document continues to support the board goal work. It's the how we're getting the work done that we might want even some strategic articulations. And then how are we going to measure how we're doing around that? So is there anything I'm hearing too And perhaps maybe that 2 and how we're operating is really focused on student learning 3 and culture 4, but any other areas that you all, or correct me if I'm not quite hearing right.
I would like to see us be active legislative advocates. And I do think that would fall under point 7. Point A of point 7, I am wondering what others would feel about an intentional reference to Iowa code there. It currently reads, articulate and advocate for the important role of local school governance. I wonder how others would feel about adding as identified in the State of Iowa Bill of Rights and Iowa Code chapters 274, 257, 257B, and 275 through 301. What do you guys think about that?
I would be in favor of adding that to that, Jennifer, just to make it more formal, that is actually state code and that we recognize state code and that we will always advocate for local control because that is what state code specifies. I
guess one of the things too, Jennifer, Director Borcherding and Director Garlock, do the codes change? So if we put it, I mean, you said, I mean, do you know what I mean?
The codes, I don't think change. I think there's some.
Well, they can change. If the legislators decide to change them, then yes, they can change.
Yeah, so I just want to throw that out because, you know, with the Iowa code, we don't want to put it in and then it changes and then it changes and.
If it's a living document, we can adjust it, right?
Okay.
One thing I wanted to possibly see added is under point 7, where we talk about advocating for the needs of students. I think we should be more direct or explicit about advocating for the needs of the students outside of the educational setting. And that goes towards social justice needs, as Director Tominski said, but also just material needs, especially in this, these are pre-existing situations, but with the economic situation looking to be what it is now, the needs of students outside our schools are important, and obviously they affect what happens inside the schools. And so, that can be tied into point 2 of, whether or not that's something the board does or something the board, operates and empowers the superintendent to do. But I think we should be, directly talking about, and obviously those things feed back into like school meal programs and things like that. But I think we should be more direct about saying, taking care of the needs of students, all students, but students in difficult times as well.
I'm seeing a connection there from what you're saying to 7B, but particularly not just about student achievement, but social emotional learning needs, community needs, social justice needs, and we could certainly add that language. So I've taken that note as well. So
I just would add that to back up what was just said, that what we're doing at Taylor, at the community school concept.
Hoover.
Thank you. At Hoover.
Yes.
I think we're looking at trying to address, I think, some of those things that Dex just talked about the students' environment and so on, and the impact it has on education. So I think we continue to monitor and get reports of how they're doing. And I think it's one of those things that'll be expanded as we look at our larger elementary schools as the rebuild.
And we do have that included in our magnet and innovative programs as a call out in the strategic plan. So we would continue to update on that specifically. This is a launch to the conversation, and I look back on your hopes for this evening, and so I do not want to be negligent. But I think that what we've identified are some clear target working areas. And then I think what Secretary Day and I can do is target where we would see in the calendar of board sessions where we can continue to have these work sessions and pronounce the goals that you all would like to continue to work on as an operating board with norms, but also on the goal areas. So I can take the feedback from tonight. I'm going to make some edits, push it back to you all and with an update. And then we can come back to this again to really narrow the focus on some of these edits. So I'm hearing pronouncements of communications work as a team. Secondly, advocacy around social justice and equity. And then you as advocates at a legislative level, as elected officials, and advocating for our kids in our community and our school district. So certainly opportunities to tweak some things here, but and the operations around safety as well. So I'll look at some of that alignment language and give a next iteration, and then we can come back and continue to get the feedback on the goals before we close tonight. Any last comments and feedback? Yes, Director Garland.
Can I get one more comment in here? Sorry.
Come on.
I've been trying to jump in. In number 7, in our advocacy for public education, I would like to throw out the idea that we need to have something more clearly defined under that category about adequate school funding. We talked rather vaguely about strengthening relationships with our elected officials, but I think making a pronounced effort to pursue adequate state funding is critical right now. And the other thing that I don't know exactly where it falls into our 7 categories here, but we don't really say anything about mental health anywhere specifically. And I think that's, especially right now, a critical component of the services we're providing to our kids and our staff.
And tying on to what Director Garlock said, I think the conversation about adequate school funding, I don't want to get too granular, right? Because this is supposed to be kind of an overarching big document, so we have some room to move. But I do think it was helpful when we visited the Hill and we were lobbying that we had a one sheet that told our story, that talked about this is our district and here's our population and here's our percentage of free and reduced and here we are with our graduation rate and this is our total enrollment and here's what we spend on staff and this is why we need this percentage of funding to be solvent. So I think that was really helpful and possibly being able to tie the larger snapshot of who we are as a district to that funding conversation could be helpful. But again, I want to be conscious of not getting too prescriptive in this document.
So I think I could certainly look at that adequate school funding. What you just described, Director Borching, would be a strategy in order to do that advocacy. We intend to do that as an annual update, by the way. But in addition to that, I look at goal 3 and we could look at student learning as well as talking about the social emotional goals too that we have under that same work that we're doing in the strategic plan. So to pronounce it there as a possibility, but I'll work on those tweaks. Really good pronouncement of things that are missing. So this has been a lot of work in a short amount of time. Again, it's a launch to the continued work of the goal of the board, but I'm certainly hearing you would like some more frequent work sessions for this kinds of discussion, and that narrowing the focus of some of our goals of the specific work that the board has been advocating for, and making sure that it's in alignment with all of the strategies we're implementing as a district around the strategic plan. So thank you for that. And on that note, I am going to hand it over to President Humbles for any last next steps or things that you would like to close out with the board tonight.
Well, first, thank you, Superintendent Bush, for us revisiting our board norms. I thought that was very important to bring us back together as a board. And we know that there's still work that we need to do, but we have a starting point right now. I don't have any additional questions, and I appreciate the feedback from the board to look at some of the areas of our board goals and to revisit that. And I think that's important because we're staying on top of that. Sometimes board goals, they're written and then they're just put in a file and you never see them again, or even strategic plans. And I can appreciate that we're being very conscientious as members of this board and looking out for what's best for our students, teachers, faculty, everybody that is in the district, that we're on top of that. So I do appreciate that. But I don't have anything else that we need to cover today. So my last words to you is the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good evening.